our next speaker, Steve Armstrong-Godwin, joining us all the way from across the pond from our pipeline program sponsor, SANS. Steve is one of the instructors over there, author of several of their courses. And some of you may have taken a class with him. Some of you may have seen him speak at other events and conferences. Today, Steve has joined us to talk a little bit about critical cybersecurity incidents and incident response and some of his experience in breach recovery. So welcome to the show.
Hello and welcome. I'm Steve Armstrong-Godwin, and let's get this rocking and rolling. So a little bit about me before I kick off. I have my favorite number is 18 for some reason. I joined the military, and I did when I was 18, and I did 18 years of active service in the Royal Air Force. That's me down there in front of a sort of armored personnel carrier in the Gulf as part of my proper wireless penetration testing and proper war driving in a battlefield situation. If you haven't done it from a tank, you ain't done war driving, trust me. Did 18 years in the military, and after that, although I enjoyed it, it got to the end of my time and I thought, let's go and try something different. So I set my own business up and I ran that for about 18 years. I had some really great fun working with a lot of interesting people. But after about 18 years, I got bored, wanted to get back into the front line of it. So I went to go back to the front line, literally, and go and be an incident handler, because the downside of running a business is you have to run a business, and admin's boring. So I went back to the front line and went back to work for a small software company. You may have heard of them. They operate out of San Francisco, called Electronic Arts. They make a couple of, like a football game and a little shooter game and a few things like that. So that's me at the top there, actually, with Stephen Martinez, which is the guy who does the voice of Luigi. That is not an L for loser. That is an L for Luigi I'm doing. Recently, I have moved over because EA was fun, and I'll tell you why I moved from EA in a second. But I have moved across to a bank, so I'm working in a bank, which is really interesting. People think a bank would be boring. I get loads of time for practicing and doing CTFs and doing lots of really good development stuff, which is kind of nice, because after sort of 25, 30 years knocking around the trenches, it's good to get a bit of time to do some recap. I also teach for SANS, as mentioned. I've been teaching now for around about 15 years. I've taught, if anybody's done the SEC 504, I've taught that one over 100 times, which is a really good course. But I've also taught wireless security, SOC stuff, general sort of 401 type, sort of, general security type things. So lots of really good stuff. As I said, I left Electronic Arts purely because they'd ran out of things for us to do, because back in 2021, we had a small breach. You may have seen it in the press, where a couple of people from Lapsus came in and decided to take a little bit of game code and try and sell it on the internet. Really, really professionally interesting. And I can say that because, I'm a fireman. I like to put out fires. Incidents are my fires. So when you get a big fire, I love to come and play. So there was really good fun. We did an awful lot of really great forensics, worked with some amazing people, some real good hardcore incident response. And if anybody in pen testing tells you that the best feeling you can ever get is to like jailbreak a system and get root on it, I'll tell you, actually, I think the best experience is actually to get somebody else in jail. Our work breach, the various and did actually get charged. And so chess, when you're dealing with instant response, is where the attackers have more pieces. They have more time. They've picked the platform. They've picked the game. So really, when people tell you it's like chess, it's not. It's not at all. It is, however, the best career if you read the manual and play the game. Why do I say read the manual? The first manual you should read is about yourself. Okay, and I have this time and time again that people, they don't actually think about themselves and they don't actually know what they're doing. So you got to think about, what are your skills? What are your weaknesses? How good are you under pressure? How long can you work for? How long can you focus for? Are you better at night or are you better in the morning? Because you should optimize yourself for that. All right. It's important to understand, what your skills are. Are you good at doing memory forensics? Are you good at doing log analysis? Are you good at doing system? Can you just feel how a system works? Because those are all really good skills, and knowing how well you work will allow you to focus on those. For example, I was doing an incident where it was actually a Simpsons game had been compromised, and we had these massive amounts of logs that we had to parse. And one of the things we were looking at was basically doing the old-fashioned good old grep and stuff, looking for unusual activity. And we got given this member of staff, and somebody said, Go use Joe. Joe's great here. Joe's available. Come, let him come on your team." And I was like, "Oh, cool. Joe, what are you good at?" He said, I'm quite good at looking at logs. Joe, have these logs. Now, I tend to test my people just before I give them like a really important thing. Just say, "What do you think of this? What do you find?" And just to compare it with what I found. So I gave Joe this log that I'd spent maybe about an hour analyzing, and I was quite comfortable with my analysis. He came back about 10 minutes later and he said, "Here's my findings." I'm like, "That's amazing, but it took me an hour. I'm quite comfortable doing this. And why did it take you 10 minutes?" He's like, I've done a little bit with logs before." I was like, "What do you do?" He said, I've developed browsers." I'm like, wow. The guy literally spent all day long looking in server logs to understand the performance impact and how browsers were working. He could read logs like almost at like network speed. It was amazing. Every time we had an incident, we're like, let's get Joe on board because he was so cool. I say about knowing yourself, knowing your timings, how will you work? Plan out your day. When I have an incident kickoff, one of the first things that I do is plan out the day. And that includes meal breaks and rest breaks. Because you may think, no, it's fine. I can do this. I can go for hours. You may be able to, but your team may not. All right. It's important to understand how long you can go without a decent break. I mean, people say 60 minutes, etc. But when you get the bug, and some of us, let's be honest, some of us are slightly on the spectrum, and therefore we get a little bit of hyperfixation. And therefore, if there's no food about, we will quite happily spend 4 hours looking at a single log. That's cool. But what happens after those 4 hours? Do you crash? Are you any useful to the team? So you have to think about this. So think and plan out your day. Plan out your schedule, plan out if we're going to go into incidents, when are we eating, when are we resting, when are we breaking? So you know what your day is, because when you're in real incident response or even doing a CTF, okay, you need to plan out what you're doing. I'll give you an example of the CTF. The OSCP exam is a 24-hour exam, 24 hours of testing, 24 hours of writing the reports, okay? Because you have to, from the start, you got 48 hours to submit your report and your answers. That's cool. The people who win plan out that day. They plan when to start the test so that their optimum time, not just taking any old test start time. They know when they're really good. They know when to take breaks. They know when to take a sleep, when to get back up, when to focus again, and when they're done. All right. It's important to know yourself. Okay. Know yourself. Another thing to think about is not to fight some of your allies. The common people that people put us against, they say blue teamers and red teamers, they're always fighting. No. I am always using red teamers. Okay. Every time I had an incident, one of the first people I would call after the IR team is the red team, because they have amazingly different skills to what a majority of blue teamers have. Because red teamers have that craft. They are artists at how to break into environments. They look at things and they see, oh, if I took this and this and this, I could make something really evil. Blue teamers will go, well, I know the artifacts that will create, but I don't know how to build it. And I wouldn't have thought of building it. And wow, I wouldn't have put it together that way. So you need to include red teamers and understand red teamers. So I'm always, anytime I have an incident, I'm dealing with it and I'm focusing it, and I have logs and I have systems to analyze. One of the things I will do is say, red team, we've done our forensics. We've got our images. I want you on the same boxes that the attackers used. And what would you do from there? Where would you go? What tools would you use? How would you use them to leverage it to get off that machine? So that's super important. It's a great skill to have because it also outsources that problem. I know it's going to take them several hours to do that analysis, generate me a report. So then when I'm looking at business units and saying, hey, you need to go and fix this machine because the attackers could have done this. And they go, no, Steve, it's not possible. You go, here's the report from the red team. Here's the screenshots. Here's the step-by-step of what they did to recreate what the attackers did. So best you go and fix it. So having red teamers on my team is amazingly useful. As I said, they think differently. And I'll give you a really simple example of how they think differently. When the iPhones first came out, I bought them when I had the company. I bought them from all my staff. But one of my staff, he hoards data. He always did. And he hoards it. And literally, at one point, he put a little text message to say, my phone's not working. Some things are starting to fail. And then about half an hour later, he sends out another text message to say, I've worked out the problem. My phone is full. We're like, And at that point, the red teamer goes, How do I replicate a phone being full? How can I fill your phone remotely to stop those services working? That's a different mindset. The blue team is like, oh my goodness, that's so bad. The red team is like, how do I recreate this? Okay. It's super important. So when I say, knowing your environment, knowing your people, knowing yourself, it's super important. Now, when I talk to things, when I look at things like knowing yourself, that also extends to the network, because a common problem we have with incident response is overconfident incident response teams. Because they sit there and say, oh, we have our EDR, it's deployed to many thousands of machines. We're sitting at 95% adoption. And 95% adoption sounds really good until you do the numbers, okay? So 95%, supposing you had 10, say you had 1,000 machines, okay? 95% of that would mean 50 machines don't have your EDR tool, your EDR platform, your detection capabilities, your response capabilities. 50 out of 1,000. But you haven't got 1,000 machines. You've got maybe 10,000 machines. So those 50 are now 500. Okay, maybe you got 20,000 machines. It's now 1,000 machines that don't have any detection on it. So it's super important to know, where are those 1,000 machines and what else do you not have your detection suite on? Okay, and people then say, oh, it's easy. Well, what you do is, if you want to go and find the bad people, you just go and look for this. You just go and sniff for this. You just go and pull that. I say, no, that doesn't work at scale. And if you're talking to new people, they will always say, it's dead easy to find the attackers. You just do things. It doesn't work at scale. And I'll tell you the reason why. So I used to work at EA, okay? And at EA, you might have, at game launch, 3 million players on FIFA. 3 million concurrent players, all right? Now think of what the bandwidth and the traffic generated by 3 million concurrent players. All right. We were doing a bit of incident response, and we were sniffing some traffic and stuff. And we found if we sniffed about 30 servers, we generated 3 terabytes of data a day. FIFA has like in excess of 5,000 servers. 30, 3 terabytes. 5,000, you can't capture that size of data. So you have to look at things differently. So people say, well, how do you look at things differently? I say, it's quite simple. You use the Sesame Street approach. And they're like, what? I say, you just look for things that are different. Because things that are different are easier to spot than what the attacker's doing. Instead of trying to say, what is the analysis, what is the intelligence saying, sometimes old-fashioned ways of finding things is just literally looking for things that are different. We've caught attackers by seeing who VPN'd out of hours, see who had a connection running for 14 days, who had a VPN outbound, who was connecting SSH out of the environment for 3 weeks. To Korea. And you go, we haven't got an office in Korea. No, but we've got an outbound VPN connection. Those things would allow us to spot them. Okay. And as I say here, as you can see, the Sesame Street, one of these things is not like the other. We would literally look at large amounts of the machines and say, what is different? What is different amongst these machines? We might go and pull logs from all those machines and say, show me all the processes that are running on all of the machines inside the environment. People say, that's an awful lot of data. It is, but I'm not looking at the big data. I do a process, what we call either stacked, ranked, or long tail analysis. I say, I don't want to see the ones that have got Microsoft Office, because that's 98% of the machines. I don't want to see who's got maybe even Visual Studio in, because that might be all your developers, another 10,000 machines. What I'm interested in is the 5 machines that have one service that nothing else has. The one machine that has one command and control backdoor. Now, how do you know it's different? Because nobody else has it. And that is why you can spot things at scale. But also, back to knowing yourself, knowing your networks. I've had incidents started because an admin came to me and went, Steve, my server feels funny. And I'd be like, what do you mean feels funny? He said, let me show you. I'll SSH into it. And he'd be like, you ready? You watching? Username, password, and here we go. There you go. And I was like, you just logged in. He went, yeah, but did you see how long it took? I'm like, dude, it's a Linux machine. Do you see how long it takes to log into Windows? And they're like, yeah, but watch it. Watch it. Username, password. I'm going to hit enter. There you go. And we're like, okay, that was half a second. He said, yeah, that felt slow. It's not the same. This machine normally feels faster. I was like, okay. So classic thing for Linux incident response. I said, well, let's see who's logged into the machine. We typed in the who command, which should tell you who is logged in. And the machine said, nobody. I was like, but aren't you logged in? He was like, yes, I am. But it says nobody's logged in. He went, yes, it does. That was the shortest identification of a rootkit, just because the rootkit was having to filter out some of the data before returning the command prompt back to the admin. It slowed it down just a little bit, which meant it felt bad to the admin, but it was an Adore NG placed by a Chinese APT on literally hundreds of the machines. But he happened to pick one that he hadn't logged into for a while, and it felt weird. You're like, wow. Even though we had EDRs deployed and things, just a little bit felt weird. We also had a similar one. I had a Windows admin who said, Steve, my server's not performing well. I was like, oh, I said, well, it's Windows. What do you expect? I said, aha, funny. So he then said, well, let me show you something. Let me just transfer some files across. So he brings up a window. He says, I'm going to transfer a file from another machine. Transfers it across. It says, like, literally, a little Windows box. It says, it's going to take 4 hours. I'm like, okay, 4 hours. Do I have to watch the whole thing? How big's the file? He said, it's 100 kilobytes. I'm like, oh, wow. 4 hours for 100 kilobytes. That is slow. Where's the server? He said, it's the next one above it in the rack. Ooh. Again, the admin had found something that felt weird. That was a photo, rootkit, and backdoor that was planted in the network driver, and it had a slight memory leak. And therefore, it was running out of cache space, so it couldn't transfer big files because it had no space to write it to a buffer. And that is how we detected that backdoor, literally by an admin going, this is weird. It's like, wow. So it's important to understand what the network looks like, what is different, and how the machines work. Because what do attackers do? Attackers do really simple things inside your environment. They do something really horrible. They read the manual. You're like, no, seriously, what do they do? No, seriously, they read the manual. I've done forensics when I've looked at Chinese APTs literally going through the IT support desk's website, reading every single document. And you're like, wow. And at the time, that organization, okay, and they were another West Coast organizations back in sort of 2015 time. They were West Coast US, and the attackers were they were great IT utilization. Staff logged off at 5 o'clock. Attacker logged in about 7 o'clock, used the machine all night, logged off, or locked the machine, I should say, locked the machine, let the staff member log back in the morning. Literally, it was like almost like 22 hours of use of that machine. It was brilliant, great utilization. Problem, it was the attackers doing it, but they were literally using the user's credentials to also just browse through and read all the IT documentation. At that time, Mandiant, which produced a really good document called the M Trends, I'd encourage you to read it. Mandiant were quoting that the average dwell time, which was the time from compromise to actual sort of detection, was in excess of 400 days. And I turned to IT and said, you realize this 400 days? I said, that means that the attacker is a senior member of IT because they've been here longer than half of your team and have actually read the documentation. Head of IT wasn't too pleased, but it was accurate. It was totally on point. If you read on that Wired article, which I mentioned earlier about EA, read what the lapsus people said that they did when they broke in. They literally read the documentation about how to set up a VPN, about how to get access to tokens, how to get access to different systems. They read the help guides. So it's like, wow. I mean, how many users do you know that read the help guides? Maybe there's a great detection. Looking for users that read the help guides when they've been in the business for more than 3 weeks. Because let's face it, when you join a business, you read all the documentation at the start, maybe, and then you don't read it again. You don't do it. You don't read it. You don't suddenly go back and think, I've been with the business 9 years. I need to go and read how to set up something basic. That's not common. Okay. So it's important to remember that. So my last sort of bit as I get into it is looking at the likes of, a great quote here by Sun Tzu, knowing yourself. Okay. If you got to know yourself, because if you don't know yourself, how are you going to defeat the enemy? If you don't understand the enemy, you don't have cyber threat intelligence, it's going to be really difficult to defeat the enemy. If you haven't got cyber threat intelligence, get the red team on. Like I said, because the red team will be like, we'll be your intelligence people. We'll tell you what we would do here. That is a form of intelligence. That is a knowledge that you don't have. And that is skills that they bring to say, this is how we can help you find what the bad people do. Because if we got here, if we were on this machine here, this is all the stuff that we would do. This is how we would do it. So in the middle of your incident, if you're sitting there thinking, I don't know what to do, get a red teamer on board and say, what would you do? Okay. This will allow you to understand what's actually happening. Okay. So understand what's going on, understand the network, understand the attacker, and also then make sure that you protect your information. One of the biggest risks that we face against our adversaries is belittling them. I don't call attackers noobs. I don't call them script kiddies, because if a script kiddie has broken into your company and taken over machines and got past your security barriers, and you say, oh, they're just a stupid script kiddie, your execs will be like, script kiddie that beat you. So you got to think about this, okay? So think about how you refer to your attacker. Always respect your attacker, and always respect the fact that they are trying to beat you. And in trying to beat you, they will be doing everything that you're trying to do about them. Learn about them, learn what they're doing, and observe. And I'll leave this as one of my parting sort of shots with you to understand, which is this is an example of a ransomware gang monitoring the IR team. Because people get complacent inside their own networks and they think they're free to talk. This is a screenshot from the Ragnar Locker team where they're actually actively monitoring the IR team, talking about how to evict the attackers. Now, there's a concept called an OODA loop, which is observe, orientate, decide, and act. And if somebody can observe what's going on, understand what's happening, decide what they're doing, and act quicker than you can, you will never evict them from the environment. Okay? So it's important for you to think about how you protect your intelligence. Because just like you're trying to learn about the adversary and you're trying to protect yourself and you're trying to defend your networks, you have to also make sure that you look after your intelligence so they don't know what you know. I've had attackers actively impersonating staff, impersonating internal members of the security team, targeting the internal members of the security team to get access to the information. Okay. I even had, at one point, we had an attacker inside the environment asking in an email as a member of staff to get access to certain websites. And they even put in the email to assist in the investigation. Wow, that was a ballsy move. But they were just blatantly asking you, can I get access to this? Can I get access to this? And attackers can be quite blasé about that. Sometimes, how do you get access to a server? You can compromise it, but you know what else you can do? Just ask, can I get access? Because if an attacker takes over a user, the staff member who's giving out the permissions doesn't know that it's an attacker. And he says, oh, you work in a development team. This is a server that a developer might want access to. Sure, my friend, have access. And they give it away. And the attacker goes, thank you very much. Because attackers are sneaky. I had an attacker who stole the multi-factor authentication from a user because they read the manual. They worked out how to actually do it, and they went into the sort of help channel with the IT department and said, I've lost my phone. I need my multi-factor authentication resetting. Please reset it. And they did so. And you're thinking, but wouldn't the user notice? The user didn't notice for 3 days, because every time the user was trying to do something, the attacker went, approve. And the user didn't notice. He was like, it's weird. It's like, I logged in on a Monday, and then the rest of the time I didn't have to use my MFA at all, until eventually the attacker had done enough and left and gave up approving the MFA. The user comes back to the help desk and goes, my MFA doesn't work. And they're like, again, it doesn't work? Can you reset it for me? Again, you need it resetting. You did it this 3 days ago. He's like, no, you didn't. And that's when the alarm bells went off, because they flagged up the fact that the attacker had literally stolen that. Okay. So it's important to understand your environment, protect your stuff, protect your internal basic stuff, how to set up your IT systems. All that IT stuff is really good intelligence that the internal people need access to, but the attacker would love to get access to. Okay. So it's important for you to bear that in mind and think about all of the incidents when you're facing about the, what do I know? How am I working? Who's my team? Who can support me? All right. How can they help me going forward? Do I need red teamers on here? Do I need developers on here? Who has a different mindset to me as a blue teamer? Everybody thinks differently. And that's why a good IR team brings a blend of different people with different mindsets. And that's super important. And when you are working in a multidisciplinary team, it's always important to look after them, because your people are your team. And there's no point in beating people up when they make mistakes, because you know what? Under pressure, everybody makes mistakes. And it's not, in a team, it's not about, are you perfect? It's about how you deal with the problems, how you deal with the mistakes, and how you, if you're responsible for the team, if you're leading the team, how you can make sure that they improve, learn from the mistakes, and are not afraid to put their hand up. Because we all make mistakes under pressure. But if you as a leader can say, hey, I made a mistake, other people say, well, if the boss can make a mistake and can be open about it and is not scared to do so, they will also be the same. And that's an important aspect, not just in IR, but in the entire enterprise. If you chastise people for being phished and say, oh, you were stupid, you were phished, you need to do the phishing training, the people are like, well, why do I want to report it? If you say, hey, look, I was phished, and they go, oh man, that's terrible, that is. Let's get your credentials sorted, let's get you back in operation, and let's just move on. Then you decriminalize it, and then people aren't scared to tell you. Okay? Good stuff. IR is always about learning and always be asking questions. I am always learning. I'm 53 and I'm still learning from people. And I learn from people older than me and I learn from people younger than me, because young people with new minds, new ideas, new ways of doing things, it's brilliant to listen to. Okay? So there we go. That is my closing thing. Always be learning and always be asking questions.